as long as we hold a shared vision of a mountaintop of what we're trying to create together, then all of that energy that we experience, we can collectively funnel in a direction. And at the end of the day, right now on this planet, so much could be solved if we funneled so much of the anger that people are feeling right now, and the despair and the sadness that people are feeling, and we could funnel that into systems and infrastructures that supported the visions that we want to create that help people thrive. That energy itself is useful.
I think we need to talk about snacks while we start this podcast.
Yeah.
Cashew cheese.
I don't eat dairy anymore. That's what we're talking about. That and banana bread.
That, and he loves banana bread, and he is enjoying the jungles here while eating banana bread. But I won't say that you're enjoying the jungles. I mean, what would you say? I mean, there's something pretty interesting going on right now, and it's really interesting that you're here to witness it, because I feel like the capacity in which you shared in both the men's circle that we had here last night and this morning as we processed elements of that men's circle, that for context in this podcast,
Context is important.
Yeah.
We've learned
Very important.
Context is very important.
Very important. For context, we basically had a men's circle completely go down into chaos, completely just be met with the coyote energy. And for those who don't understand that, what I'm referencing here is the energy upon which there is somebody who chooses to kind of be the trickster of the group, right? And man, I know that I learned a fuck ton about myself and about like men's circles and about the things, and I know that I was comparing it to like the result that we had last year, because last year it went so, like, it was like literally the best men's circle I've ever been a part of. And I've been a part of a couple men's circles, and so anyway, you know, we dealt with a ton of adversity, and I just want to say how much I appreciated the way you showed up in that.
Oh, thank you, brother. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, you know, for people who maybe have never even heard of a men's circle before, it's essentially men getting together and circling up, and with the intention of opening up, sharing what's alive for them. And you can have a lot of different types of men's circles, right? You can have maybe business-oriented ones where we circle up and let's like discuss business and how we can support each other, or whatever that might be. That often gets classified as maybe a mastermind or something. But like, it's a form of men's circle if it's men only. And
Totally.
the type of men's circle that we're talking about on this podcast right now that went down last night is the one where let's create a safe space for men to get together and open up vulnerably and share their hearts and be met and create connection through vulnerability. And what transpired was, you know, I've spoken to a lot of people there was a particular group that was kind of spearheading the mutiny, if you will. And I've clocked it. I've spent about 5 hours now outside of the men's circle and outside of the group processing, speaking to individuals and just trying to get an understanding of the ethos, because my ethos in my life, what I live by, is the idea that everyone is choosing love in every moment as best they can.
Yeah, I love that.
And so the actions that happened there, where there was a fuck this and like, no, fuck you can't tell me what to do, and I'm gonna just show up with that aggression, was their form of love and self-love. It was, I have a way of viewing the world that I'm not willing to budge on, because if I compromise that, then I'm not loving myself.
Yeah.
And then I'm not loving you, because I'm showing you a compromised version of masculinity. And so while I recognize that, what I come down to honestly is, was it effective at the greater mission? Because something that I do when I consult in business is recognizing that sometimes the optimization of the business requires sub-optimization of the parts.
Totally.
Right? And so there's the understanding that, you know, you may desire. I should break that down, right? What I mean is, if you let's look at a soccer team, right? The offense, if you are saying your only job is to score and you will be like paid for every goal you score, and the defense, your only job is to stop the scoring and you will be deducted salary for every goal you allow. Now you have this team that is actually not supporting each other, because the defense isn't going to support the offense because they're entirely dependent on not letting people score. And then the offense isn't going to come back and help on defense because their only job is to score.
Totally.
And so sometimes to optimize the whole, we get to sub-optimize the parts. And I think that the ethos of what I've seen in this particular organization is we're going to hold a particular stance no matter what, even at the expense of
all other processes.
All other processes.
Exactly.
And so I respect it to a degree, and I find it to be ineffective.
Totally. I mean, there is no doubt about the fact that it was ineffective.
Depending on that depends on what
faction
your
you were
mountaintop
part
is.
of. Yeah.
Well, what is your ultimate goal? What is your intention?
Is the goal, and it seems like, and this is like the interesting thing, and this is where I want to go with this, at least as a question, is like, what does freedom culture mean? And is it possible for us to come together and co-lead? I mean, it's definitely possible that people co-lead, but is it possible as like multi-organizational, kind of factional of sorts? Can we really co-lead a group of people as a group of 150? And I'm so curious as to like, is it really fucking worth it sometimes to build community at this scale? Like, is it worth, I see such beautiful things with what you do with your community and the different things that you're doing online.
The art of choosing love.
The art of choosing love.
Plug it in there.
The art of choosing love. Make sure I love all of you, the art of choosing love community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've watched you grow the community. I've watched you grow different elements of what is possible within that community. But more importantly, I think I've watched you grow the community of people around you who are also a part of that tribe. And you tend to travel with some of your best friends who, at the end of the day, there's some way of building an enormous amount of cohesiveness and like a shared reality, to use some terminology here, within a smaller group of people. But, at what point, and for me, what the real challenge that came up was, okay, I get it. You're holding the pillar of freedom in the highest of regards, which is, I have my sovereignty and I don't need to agree to some kind of anything that would somehow restrict my reality. Now, I don't agree with that, but I understand that perspective. But it's the second piece that drives me nuts, because they keep confusing it, or at least from my perspective, because they keep saying, well, isn't this freedom culture? I'm like, no, it's freedom. That's what you're exemplifying is freedom. And culture is the other half of the equation that brings the balance that says, and there are some implicit agreements and explicit agreements, and we maintain as a culture. Like, I don't just shit in your food. Like, I don't just go and beat you up every day. I don't rob your stuff. I don't do things that are, those are obvious ones, but I also don't disrespect you by yelling and standing over you or doing any of those different pieces.
Physical intimidation, which was a part of it.
When you take away somebody else's freedom, that's not there has to be a point of not being an asshole where you're taking away or putting somebody else in danger, whether that's mentally or physically, in that sense.
Well, and the thing is that the argument that I've heard on the other side is that they felt like their freedom and their safety was being encroached upon.
Yeah.
And so they were standing up for theirs. And
Totally.
At a certain point, what I see in that scenario is playing out in the collective, where it's like, well, you've wronged me, so now I can wrong you, and that's okay. And then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to act this way. And it's a justification of behavior that is not supportive to a greater vision of unity. And we're seeing that play out in the collective right now. And so at a certain point, one of the sides, I look at the Israel and what was happening in the Middle East for so many generations, and at a certain point, we even forget who started it, who did what, yes, we can all find the justification for why we are righteous in our anger. And if we're going to shift it into a new paradigm, at a certain point, some side gets to say, okay, I may feel encroached upon. I feel like you may have like violated my safety or my freedom or whatever it is. And I recognize that to come into unity, I get to swallow that and step in and show up in a different way than I have been, because the way I have been has been contributing gasoline to the fire. And that's it's tough to
hard.
It's tough.
It's fucking
tough
hard.
because like look at out there right now. We're at this retreat where I have experienced, and what has been reflected to me is so much disconnect now as a result of that. And if our goal collectively, if on the two sides, if we're going to even take sides, but if on these two sides we're all saying we want connection, then at what point do we recognize that that didn't happen? Yeah. And the conversations I've been in with some of that leadership team, it goes to, well, look at, we're connected right now. I feel more connected to you than ever before. Yeah. And like at the end of the circle, when there was like, 30% of the men left or whatever it was. Sure. And they said, look at the group here and how connected everyone feels. And I said, you know what? I don't get to punch you in the face and then bring some ice and be like, oh, look at the perfection of me bringing you ice, bro. Yeah.
So connected.
Look
Such
at
a
how
bonding
connected
moment.
we are.
Yeah.
No, motherfucker, you punched me in the face. That's where it is. And there's a spiritual elitism that I feel when we go into everything's perfect. Yeah. Like I can go in and I can throw all of your shit in your house against the wall and break all your stuff, and then because you're triggered and now we're having a conversation about like why did I do that, and okay, now we're having a real conversation, and that's perfect. And there's a level in a number of spiritual communities that I've seen, there is that I like whatever shows up is perfect, and it feels like a lack of responsibility for the creation of what showed up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think they can say that they responsibly brought their concerns to the table. I don't think that they can share in the idea that somehow we are more connected because of it.
I think they genuinely believe that.
They do.
And whether that's a rationalization, whether that's whatever, that is an experience of their truth that I honor. Yeah. I honor the fact that they believe that, and that's why I try very hard not to go into the space of what's right and what's wrong. Totally. I think that becomes really dogmatic and divisive. And so for me, I say, okay, what's our commonality? What's the lowest? So if we're going to go from like a value system, what's the lowest root level value that we can agree upon? Yeah. And from that space, let's say, okay, did those actions that were taken bring us closer or further from that shared value? Mm-hmm. And I believe that they desire connection. I really do. I believe that they desire love. I really believe that. And so then my question is, the three of us are sitting around here, and most of the people I've spoken to are sitting around here saying, wow, that was ineffective at creating connection and love at the level that I think we're collectively wanting to move towards. Yeah. And so if we can just change the wording and get away from what's right, what's wrong, and sit in that conversation of what's actually effective for a shared common goal, that is I think a starting place where we can get rid of the divisiveness.
Yeah, I love what you're bringing to the table of getting rid of the divisiveness. And I love that the message that you bring forward in the most powerful of ways is, how do we choose love?
It's an art form. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I've heard a thing or two about this art.
I really, because like, here's like how I feel. Like, I feel like I failed the group in some ways. I feel like I built a little bit of a council, and one of them is again, Matthew, the healing Matt, of course, who I thought was like, okay, him and like Phil and Kevin and Aloka and like myself, and like we can we can easily bring some level of this, and I kind of, and even Devin as well, like I felt like I democratized it pretty big time there, and we had a lot of firepower. And at the exact same time, it was amazing to me that that it was still a challenge. You know what I mean? It was amazing to me that we didn't know truly how to choose love, because we're actually really not put in that many situations of that much conflict anymore.
Yeah, that's my main question, and kind of the thing that I've been pondering on was, I pretty much didn't say much as that was unfolding. I was kind of keeping to myself, and I was able to share in smaller circles that broke out afterwards. And part of the thing that I have been processing is how much do I try to step in and try to make sense of that, because I felt like every time somebody was just adding to it or trying to add their sense to it, that it would just swirl out, and I thought it was getting more and more messy, as opposed to just more closing up. And I was like, why do I even put energy into something that I feel is ineffective? So it's like I just didn't feel like I was equipped enough to find a solution with that. So I was unsure of how I could react in that situation. And I have a lot of respect for people like yourself and some of the others that were like still consistently working with what was happening to find some resolution or find some clarity or to find some clearer path.
Well, something a friend of mine said to me many years ago that has stuck with me is because he was in a political argument in like line of some restaurant or something with someone, and I asked him, dude, why did you go like for 15 minutes in this political argument? And he said,
reason.
You're never going to convince that person. And he said, I'm not actually trying to convince that person. I'm just aware of all the people who are listening to that person right now. And if I don't say something, those people might actually believe that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I specifically, the primary like instigator of that energetic, right? Last night, I was there face to face with him, and I said to him, what is your intention?
Mm-hmm.
Like the energy you're bringing, I would like to know what is your intention.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gave the answer of super awesome amazingness. And I thought, okay, what does that tangibly look like? Like, how would you like this circle to look? And it was ignored and it was deflected. And one more time later on, I tried. But in that moment, I realized, he doesn't actually have one.
Mm-hmm.
Like he doesn't actually have, like perhaps how he's acting is the intention, just to disrupt for the sake of disrupting. And as I've learned more of the ethos of it, I think that it solidifies more of my belief that was kind of the intention, is just let me disrupt any form of structure at all.
Yep.
And the thing about it is, if so none of my interactions at that point became about trying to convince any of him specifically, but really any of the other people on that side of the argument, to convince any of them anything. But I recognize that we are in a circle of so many men who aren't sure what's happening, some of them never been in a men's circle before.
Oh, people were literally asking me, like, is this staged?
Yeah.
Like, they thought it was theater. Like, legit.
And so in the few times that I did interject myself into that, it was from that space of I just want to give. And one of the things that I spoke to was, okay, I think it's great that we can talk about, have the energetic, because apathy is actually the enemy.
Yeah.
Apathy is the thing that is very difficult to work with because there's no energy to work with. So when people get angry, I love it. Awesome. And we can work with that. And so I spoke that so that the men in the space didn't think that the anger was what was wrong.
Yeah.
And recognizing, okay, but what's effective of getting us to our goal? Because I want the men in the space that are listening that aren't sure what's happening to recognize that we can collectively be angry, be upset, be sad, be triggered, all of those things. And as long as we hold a shared vision of a mountaintop of, and I use the word effective for that, but like a shared vision of what we're trying to create together, then all of that energy that we experience, we can collectively funnel in a direction. And at the end of the day, right now on this planet, so much could be solved if we funneled so much of the anger that people are feeling right now, and the despair and the sadness that people are feeling, and we could funnel that into systems and infrastructures that supported the visions that we want to create that help people thrive. That energy itself is useful. And so that's the space that I was coming from, of like why I chose to continue to engage in the moments that I did.
Perfect. Love that.
Yeah, I think you did a phenomenal job at, because at some point I wasn't trying to convince anyone who was causing the chaos that it would end. Now you revert to like a damage control scenario.
Triage.
And yeah, and in that damage control, you're like, okay, how am I going to show people that I'm willing to lead, that I'm willing to meet this, that unfortunately it's impossible to reason with the unreasonable, that it is very difficult to navigate this, all the while being respectful, and at the exact same time, I didn't know, like, part of me is still in the deep inquisition of like, should I have like gone in angrier and like really kick them out? Like, should I have like chosen to be like to expel something, or should I choose to like continuously? It's like I'm still struggling with the idea of like, what does love look like in that scenario? Because I fucking love what you're saying about like, man, the worst thing to deal with is apathy. If I lose hope and we lose hope as a group and we can't see that shared reality, like that shared like vision of like, yes, we all wanted this, and even though it didn't happen, we know who wanted it in this group because we could feel it, and that's beautiful, and we can have that in some way, shape, or form. Like even just in our minds, we didn't get to experience it for real there, but in a sense, but it's so interesting to navigate the idea of like what that starts to look like, and we're so good at like knowing how to like, again, bring out the light out of ourselves sometimes. Like we spend so much time, like in your case, bringing your art to the world, right? Whatever that art might be. And so many people are learning that skill. But I ask myself, how do we now, I'm really curious as to whether or not we, to know how to choose love better, actually need to be exposed more to hate. Like, is there a way in which we can study more of the scenarios in which these kinds of things happen, and how do we learn from that? Because people try to invoke some level of wisdom. Like they're like, tribal wisdom will say that having a talking stick is super important, and like multiple people said that, and it was amazing that we could like. It was like there was such resistance at that point that it was impossible. It was like it felt so difficult to even move through that. But like, is part of choosing love understanding and being put into more scenarios of fear sometimes in your mind?
Yeah, so my belief on this is that we learn from contrast. I believe we live in a world of polarity. Just the very nature of the idea of there was a void before creation, and then there was creation, whether that's the Big Bang or Adam and Eve, like whatever anyone believes in, there was a space before existence, and then there was existence. Yeah. And so we live fundamentally in a world of polarity. What I do believe, though, is that if we're looking at a scale of 0 to 100, and that was like the scale of love, 0 to 100, contrast exists between 99 and 100.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, contrast exists from 45 to 55. This idea that the shadow at the level of like 1 is an absolutely necessary component for us to experience love at the level of 100, I think is actually a virus of thinking that keeps us attached to shadow and pain at the level that we're experiencing on this planet. And that level of pain and suffering that we're seeing as the result of the idea that this shadow will never go away, that rape and molestation and genocide, like that will never stop because it's just part of the human shadow. Fuck that. Like, I don't believe that at all. And the idea, if we believe that, then it will manifest in our reality, because there's a part of our subconscious mind that will not allow us to even release that level of shadow from our own systems.
Totally.
And so I agree that we grow through contrast, but I do think that we can be in contrast from 99 to 100, and we can release all the other density that so much of the world seems to be holding on to so tightly.
Yeah. I here's what I'll here's a question I think that you are also uniquely positioned to answer, and And it's a tough one because I don't know that there is an answer, but I would love to see how you move through it.
I love those types of
that's
questions.
wild.
Let me just
No,
throw
no,
you
no,
a riddle and
yeah,
let's see
yeah,
how you do it live on the podcast.
No, but I mean,
See how
like,
you
well, here's what I'm trying to bring up. Like, you experienced a trauma,
I was
that-
molested at the age of 5.
and recently that like came to you, and then eventually you shared it, and you shared it quite publicly on your show, The Art of Choosing Love, and on a stage, and like many, in the most like ballsy of ways, for real.
Thank you.
And it seems like there's a like amazing, Norman Brooks, who the father of one of the founders here at Punta Mona, where we are, is said something about something really passionate or really interesting. He says they love to process the process. Like, their joy comes from just like processing, essentially, and being in this position where processing is somehow valued in this particular way, where it doesn't really seem like the conclusion, which is that maybe there's a destination after the process. Like, where's the line drawn between I'm a victim, I experienced trauma, I felt something that was not right, and I clearly, obviously, like, molestation, for sure, you're a victim. Like, I honor the victim. But where and how do you cross that line to saying, like, well, wait, yes, I was a victim. Yes, freedom was taken away from me. Yes, all these things are happening out there. Where do we cross the line and now say, okay, like, how are we now stepping in to the solution, stepping into forgiveness, stepping into trust with one another, stepping into all the different things? Because it seems like a spiritual bypass from my perspective that you just say, like, well, I'm not done processing. It's like, well, will we ever be done processing? Like, will the world ever change? Like, will we ever be done processing at this point? Like, I don't believe that the people who have built some of the greatest companies, the greatest countries, the greatest things, inventions on the planet, did such without any adversity, right? Like, they all had inner conflict here and there, or they had conflict in their families, or whatever it is, or they had divorces, or whatever the hell, and yet they still had to, like, show up and do these things. Like, the greatness can emerge while still maintaining some level of shadow. Like, to think that we're going to get to 100% light is just this, for me, a false ideal.
I don't know if I heard a question in there, but I can respond.
Well, wait, where do we cross the line? How do we cross the line? Right? Where is it had that we can start moving? And what does that look like for you personally when you chose to move through this? Right? I don't know if you were able to move through it all 100%, but how did you move from victim to forgiveness, from victim to I'm willing to share, from like, this is only for me, and I like, and I need to process, to now I get to, like, let that go and not necessarily bring it to every circle all the time about everything. I mean, dude, you could have easily come in and been the coyote and just been like, fuck men's circles, men are fucking assholes because I experienced this shit. Like, you could have done that.
Yeah.
So where do you cross that? Like, how do you do that?
I believe that we are always in process. Like, we are always processing by this, just the fact that we are always evolving. And, like, you know what I mean? Like, this conversation for me is a process. And after I leave this, there's things that will have been said that stay with me, that keep me in process. The important thing is how we process. If we choose to process in a way that causes harm to other people, that is a disservice, in my opinion. And that's where I disagree with the approach that happened last night, is many men felt harmed by what took place last night. And so you can be in process, you can be in your anger and etc., but at what point are we just like, now I'm just spreading that anger out into the world in a way, well, now, like, we can clean it all up, but all we're cleaning up is the trauma that we started, right?
But then
like,
it's like hurt people.
Exactly.
We're literally creating this scenario where it's like, well, because you were hurt, now you're justifying that you're going to hurt others. And that, like, that pattern is, like, in many reasons why these problems happen, like, of rape or molestation. Like, there's a lot of that, like, unfortunately, the statistics show, like, the person who tends to be a molester has been molested in the most, like, sad of realities, you know, is there like that pattern interrupt? Like, how have you felt that you've been able to like move out of that?
I think it is a continual thing. There's stages to this. There's levels to this. For example, I believe that in order to heal, we get to feel. Like, it's very important that we get to feel, and that's where safe containers, safe spaces for people to feel is really important, especially men who have been told not to feel.
Yeah.
For most of the general public's life, men have been told not to feel certain things. Don't cry like a little girl, like all those things, right?
Yeah.
And so collectively, I think it is important to feel, and that's why when the anger shows up or the rage or whatever, great, awesome, let's feel that, and let's feel it in a way that doesn't cause harm. For me, when I first, so for context, I was molested at the age of 5, and I didn't remember it until I was almost 31 years old, and I'm 34 now. So the last like 3.5 years of my life had been the process of like, what now? Like, what now? It makes sense why I am the way I am from a behavioral standpoint in so many instances, but like, how do I deal with that? And one of the first things was, I wanted to, for people who aren't familiar, I was in an ayahuasca ceremony, 2 of them. That's how the memory even came back to me. And the first thing I did when that came into my experience was go, awesome, how can I use this for good? Like, now that I know that it happened, how can I use this for good? And I tried to call in the spirit of the person who did this to me and forgive them, like literally within 5 minutes of that. And grandmother Aya, the spirit, and for people who aren't familiar with ayahuasca is, it is a vine that is mixed with chacruna and water, and it creates a brew that is called ayahuasca. It's an entheogen. It is a shamanic experience that takes you on a visual, energetic journey. It's been used in indigenous cultures. I encourage you to look it up if you're interested, and take it very seriously. Treat it sacred. It's not a game. And with that said, I said, okay, let me call in that spirit. Let me forgive immediately. And I was reprimanded several times as I continued to try and do that by the spirit of ayahuasca that said, no, now's not the time to forgive. You get to sit in the impact of this event on you. Yeah. You actually get to feel this. You actually get to become aware of how deeply you've been impacted. And that's that space of feeling, right? Like, any forgiveness that we grant to someone else before we've allowed ourselves to actually feel the impact is superficial at best, disingenuous possibly at worst, and everything in between. And so for me, the journey has been first in just like accepting it and understanding all the ways in which it's affected my relationships. It's affected my relationships with my parents and my partner at the time, and all these different spaces, my relationships to men and my ability to look men in the eyes and all of these things. And then from there, the journey of recognizing that I was victimized. And in that moment, I was a victim. But I am not a victim. What happens is sometimes there's a victimization that happens, and then the person who was victimized takes on the identity of the victim. And the moment we take on the identity of a victim, we are now, I think of what it means to be a victim. It means you were helpless. Right? It means that you were taken advantage of, you were wronged in some way, generally against your will, and like all of the nuances of what that means. And if we identify and define ourselves in any way as being a victim, then we will perceive our interactions through that lens of all those nuances that aren't serving. And so my journey has been in recognizing, yes, I was victimized in that moment. I was a victim. Now that I'm aware of it, I have choice. Awareness gives us choice. And I choose not to define myself as a victim moving forward. And that's why I show up in those circles and show up with an open heart to these men, and they can meet me with aggression. And you're right. There's a moment where I go, wow, I could choose to let this mean that I'm going to have less trust for men. But what does that serve? That's ineffective for my goal of moving forward into a space of more love, whatever that looks like. And that's the real question at the end of the day. Do we believe that everyone is choosing love to the best of their ability? And when I brought that up, I brought it up this morning, and I was challenged firmly on it in, again, spoken over and like the whole thing. But like there was this moment of when you think about, I use this example because this one's really hard, but when you think about Hitler and you think about the Holocaust, to get to the place where I can see Hitler as choosing love and say literally he believed that the world would be a better place if he exterminated all the Jews. He believed that he would be loving his people and his country more if he carried that out. That was his belief. Now, do I agree with that? No. Am I condoning that? Absolutely not.
Clearly.
But there's a difference that happens when I view that as an act of hatred versus when I view that as him choosing love in the way that he thought was best. And to get to that place has taken a very, very long time. But what it does allow me to do is sit in that men's circle and not be triggered. And it sits and go into the next morning, or a 3-hour conversation following that circle, or a 30-minute conversation with one of the leaders afterwards, and sit in there and be like, I'm not thinking that you're trying to wrong me.
Yeah.
There's no malicious intent here on your part. I'm not receiving that. And I can sit with a state of compassion and empathy that if I thought you were coming from a space of hate, I couldn't hold. And so that's the loving thing, and that's where I think that we get to hold a frequency of love at the deepest level, which not only means that I'm holding love in how I show up for you, but I'm holding you in the space of love, meaning I believe that you are choosing love because you are love at your deepest core too. And it's my responsibility as a beacon of love to work on myself to get to the point where I can see your actions as love. That's my work.
Fucking love that. I really, 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 really love your perspective. I really love how much you've chosen to express the love that you have for others, the love that you have for yourself, the love that you have for people who surround you in the deepest of ways. And I really appreciate what you had to share. I really appreciate you as a leader in this community, whatever confines you want to have that as. But you're a leader in the type of authentic sharing, relating, and personal development work that you have exemplified in yourself and in the way that you show up. And I think it's obvious that we have a lot of work to do. A lot more work than I even thought.
I cried. By the way, I cried a solid probably 20 or 30 minutes this morning after the circle where I left, and I just, because I've worked really hard over the last 2 months specifically dealing with this thing of like, what's the point? Like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really tired of working towards this. And I call it soul fatigue. I feel like it's like a multi-lifetime thing of just like, I'm so tired of this, and going into some darkness. And feeling like I'm on beyond the crest of that and being on the other side, and recognizing the part of me inside that was wanting to go, see, there's no point. Yeah. Even the conscious community that is all about love can't even seem to have a circle around a fire without being at each other's throats. What the fuck is the point? And so crying about that and feeling so deeply that feeling of, are we ever going to change? Like, are we ever going to shift anything if that? And so, like, I fully agree with you. And my question, I know we're probably trying to wrap up just based on what I feel, but my
wow, you can tap into the field like that?
God. I think that's me, just as a podcast host myself, just it's the deep dive.
No, please.
Yeah. So my question for you is, I was journaling about this morning, and I was my journal entry started like, what is community? Like, what is actually community? Because at the end of the day, I thought community was, we have shared values, and therefore we come together with the foundation of those shared values. And every single person here would say that love is a core pillar of their values, maybe the core pillar of their values. And so we recognize that at the end of the day, when we discuss values, what we're talking about is semantics, because what love looks like to you and what love looks like to you and what
How I choose to express
freedom looks like to you and what culture looks like to you, each of us has a different definition of that.
Yeah.
So any community that's being built around a constitution or a idea of some words put in a certain order that sound amazing still are going to be relatively meaningless when in comparison to action.
Yeah. Totally.
In action, because how I could see who my community is that I want to be around my children. I can see who my community is that I want to share land with. I can see who my community is that I want to create business with. I can see that in how people show up.
Yeah.
In those moments, I saw last night how people show up and who is community, if we're going to use that, and just from the sake of like of who I want to spend that time with and go deeper with. Totally. And that's beyond the words.
Yeah.
And so my encouragement for people who are looking at like building communities or wondering where their community is yes, the words are great, and look at the action.
Yes.
Put that into practice and see what shows up, and allow that to inform what community truly means, because at the end of the day, community is a word. It is a wrapper for a feeling.
Yes.
It is a wrapper for a feeling that we have, and that feeling cannot be put into words. And so you have to go out and experience it.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious after your takeaway as someone who I see as being a beacon for community and a stand for community. After this experience, what do you believe community to be?
Yeah, I fucking love that question, and I'm just gonna zoom out here real quick. Boom. Yeah. You know, I think part of me has been looking to continuously refine my version of what I'm looking like and what I'm looking for when it comes to community. And to me, in the example that we've just been breaking down, community was the feeling that I had with the brothers who, at the end of the day, I still felt connected with, no matter how many words, no matter what they were saying, no matter like the way that they were showing up, the energy in which they embodied, those people, like through their actions, or sometimes their inactions, or their actions of walking away, or whatever action they chose, I got to see who I can like really want to like relate with and like co-create with and share with in different ways. And I unfortunately have watched my sense and my belief in community erode over time, as I've seen some of these scenarios play out. But what's so crazy to me is that this mastermind is an experiment in that community. And last year, I felt like we were able to breed an enormous amount of community vibe. And we were able to bring so much energy and beautiful energy to the table, particularly in the men's circle. It was like one of the best things we did, legit. And so community is this active organism of sorts in which we are putting, as a collective, a group of people are putting in energy to continuously relate, to find the nuances within those words that they're using and the communications that they have amongst each other, and to sense true intention mixed with attention. You know, I really believe that through intentions, we are the architects of the universe. And so much of like personal development is focused on the intention piece, right? Like the fucking whole secret and like all that stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like intend, and it will happen. And that's kind of like the way that they process it. It's like it's so hilarious to me. It's like, oh, we just need to clear the field and then something will emerge. It's like, no, that's half of it. Mm-hmm. That's one half of it, which is that you need to feel more free in yourself and in your body and in your own reality to even participate in community. One half. Second half is through attention, we are the engineers of our reality, right? We are the engineers of what actually gets to happen with what we put attention to. So attention in modern day society is even what we scroll on, right? Mm-hmm. On our phones. But it's also what we like, where do I show up? Right? Like, where do I actually like come in and put the work? We're like, we can all say that we care about being stewards of the planet, but not much of us do anything about it. We can all say that we value community, but not everyone really looks to participate in community or actively be a part of it. You know, we can say a lot with our words, and no matter what the semantics of the words that people choose to use, I am noticing that for me, community is only something that I get to know when I see it embodied and in action. I need to see people do the work at this point, because I don't believe in the words that people want to say about community anymore. So I don't know exactly how I can define it fully, and I'm still like, honestly, I'm in that inquisition, and like even leading this mastermind, like a lot of my own energy and Garrett's energy was like, we have to do it differently. Like, this is like working to some degree, and maybe there's a way that we can like test something else to see if there's like better little versions of this that also unfold. And like, at what scale can we create that tribe-like feeling the most? Is it better at 35 or at 50 or at 100 or 150? Like, where does that happen?
Yeah. And how do we incorporate online, right? Like,
Yes.
Because my community is primarily online, and
Totally.
people come to live events, which is awesome, and we're building that.
Yeah.
But there's no like hub city.
Yeah.
Right. There's no piece of land or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm learning how to cultivate that and curate that online, which is its own ecosystem of community. Right?
Yeah. What and how you do that for you in your case is that you show up. Right? It's like the biggest thing with community, and the only way I get to sense community from you is not that you made one video and it goes viral and now all of a sudden I'm part of your movement in any way, shape, or form. It's when you show up all the time and you do your lives and you like show up for the community and you put out a course or you do whatever it is, right? Like whatever it is that you're doing, you are acting in service to something greater than yourself, and that's community. Community embodied by an individual is that you are acting in service of something that is bigger than you. And everyone thinks that they're doing that, but not really. They're just not really doing that all the time.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, right, community is something that there's going to be millions of them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
going to be so many communities, and so it's not about my community is better than your community.
Sure.
It's, hey, my community over here acts this way, and your community, like over here, we're vegan, and over there, you eat eggs. Fuck you, I'm going to kill you. That doesn't work anymore. But it's like, oh, you're vegan, and we're not. Amazing. We can live right next door to each other and get along. You know what I mean? And that's the space that I'm coming from. And I'll say this. I will say this. I learned more from last night's men's circle than any other men's circle I've ever been a part of in terms of learning.
True.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful in that way. And that does not excuse the behavior.
Yeah.
That does not invite it. I'm not saying
I
I desire it again. And we get the opportunity to respond how we choose to respond. And I'm going to choose to respond by taking this learning and turning it into really dope art.
Fuck yeah.
AKA, he chooses to respond with the art of choosing love.
The art of choosing love.
Go check out his podcast, A Deep Dive. No, seriously, go check it out. I mean, thank you, Adam, for being a part of this. Thank you, Garrett, for being a part of this too, and holding so much space in that circle. And there's a million things that we could have spoken about, but I don't know that there's that many people I could have spoken about this with here so authentically and in like this, like recording it so that we can bring this to the world. Because I think that there's lots of people who are going to struggle and feel this, and I want this message to go out to those people so they can even hear this too.
I hope they get a chance to listen to it.
Exactly.
And nothing I've said here, like I've said most of this to the people out there.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And I think that we have the opportunity as leaders to be transparent.
Totally.
Which is something that hasn't been a part of leadership for so long, and is a welcome sight, I think, for people. And it's kind of the basis for everything I do, is being as transparent and authentic and raw and vulnerable as possible. And I'm grateful that, like, you and I had not conflict, but we had a thing earlier, and we sat down, we communicated about it, we hugged it out, and we're like, great, we're gonna find a solution. Like, you know what I mean? There's
Totally.
ways to do it. And so I'm grateful. I consider you part of my community.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just grateful for both of you. And especially I have this image of you, Garrett, standing by the fire with your raincoat and like your hood on, and you're just like standing, because you're like directly across from me, and you're just like staring into the fire like,
Oh fuck.
what the fuck is happening?
What the fuck are we doing here? Yeah.
And that's like burned into my mind. So I just like thank you, because I could tell like inner what was going on. And I think in many ways it takes more self-control not to yell and speak up.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like it takes more to actually sit there when all of that is happening and say, I can just hold space and hold calm so that other people can feel my energetic in that. And seeing you in that moment I feel like oftentimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and I want to acknowledge you for for what you held there, and even now in the podcast and the role that you play in so many ways on this planet, and how I've seen you show up. And I want to acknowledge that, because it's just as important
Totally.
as anyone who's going to be speaking a whole shit ton.
Appreciate that, brother. Digging
Yeah.
in roots, trying to capture the essence of the tree. Right
So
now.
where can people find more of you? I mean, all the links are somewhere in the description, somewhere, all that stuff. But if there's one thing that you can ask of people who are listening to this, who resonate and want to learn more about what you're doing.
AdamRoa.com, ADAMROA.com, or theartofchoosinglove.com. Obviously the podcast, the deep dive, Adam.Roa on Instagram or Facebook. And last but not least, unlockyourinnerartist.com, which is my video course in partnership with Superhero Academy.
Yes.
All about how to unlock deeper aspects of creativity. I teach the creative process that I use to create the art that I create. And it is a process of becoming the best, highest expression of your unique self. And I teach that process, and I'm really proud of that course. And so you can go to unlockyourinnerartist.com if you want to take that.
Boom.
brother.
Mic drop. Love you, brother.
Love you guys.